All right. It is about one after. I'm going to give this a few seconds. I know that I'm not going to run up against time for this session. We'll definitely leave some time for Q&A at the end, but we'll start sharing my screen in just a minute. And the organizers recommended that we turn off our cameras to make sure that we've got the best picture possible for the recordings of our slides. So I'm going to do that in just a second. I'll disappear, but hopefully you'll still hear me if I do everything correctly. Finding the right tab. Oh, goodness. That is not what I wanted. Sigh. Too many tabs open, folks. Infinity, John. It is the infinity experience of DrupalCon. It just feels like it's taking forever. Yes, thank you, Amy June. I am really excited to answer questions and talk to folks, but I am not good at multitasking. So if you have questions as I'm talking, please pop those into the Q&A tab. We will revisit it. I am grateful for Amy June being here to help keep me in line because I definitely need her. Thank you. All right. I am going to get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Katie Richards. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm here to talk about fostering community intentionally, or 3 questions you need to answer to promote community growth. I've been working on the community team at Pantheon for almost 2.5 years, but that's only 2.5 years about my 6-year experience in building communities. And I apologize in advance if I slip up and say WordPress instead of Drupal, because that's the open source community that I started with. Pantheon introduced me to Drupal shortly after I joined the team in 2019. And here I am. It turns out that both communities are made out of awesome people, some of whom are my closest friends to date. I probably don't need to spend too much time talking about how awesome the Drupal community is, since we're here to spend time with and learning from each other. So let's talk about fostering community. Making friends as a child was way easier than making friends as an adult. As a kid, you could walk out onto a playground or into a park, see someone playing on the slide or the swings, and say, "Hey, you like the swings? I like the swings. Let's be friends." And then came adulthood. Why doesn't anyone warn you how much more difficult it is to keep and make good friends as an adult? Friends move, get demanding jobs, start families or businesses, and everyone gets busier. It turns out that making any sort of meaningful connection to another human as an adult takes intentional work. And really, that's what a community is. Communities are a place for a virtual or physical place that allow for meaningful connections with other people. It can be difficult to find folks with similar interests across the globe, but thankfully, we've got Drupal to bring us together. As community builders, we bridge the gap by creating a place for people to connect. Doing this successfully does take some intentional work. When it comes to building a professional community like a Drupal meetup or a community supported by a single business, there are 3 questions that those responsible for community growth need to answer. The first one is, who are you? Any structure being built requires a solid foundation. Most businesses without goals or proper planning don't last very long, and growing communities share that need for a solid foundation. Why is starting a community important to you or your organization? What is your goal? If I'm going to use Drupal meetups as an example, I would wager that many of those meetups have kind of a 3-part goal. 1, learning and sharing about Drupal and related technologies, while 2, meeting like-minded people, and 3, who live in your local community. That third one, possibly not as applicable during the pandemic when many of these meetups have gone virtual. And so you can have people from 2, 3, 4 Even DrupalCon as an example, I don't know how many time zones are represented here, but we've got all times of the day going on. Communities created as part of a business would probably have similar but slightly different goals. Pantheon's community goals, in my words, are to connect with Pantheon's customers, both as users and human beings. Two, to help solve their problems. And three, promote the open web. Part of that is defining your culture, both what you are and what you are not. If we define culture as the manifestation of beliefs and actions of a group of people, as a community builder, you are in the privileged position of choosing the type of behavior you want to see within your community. One absolutely essential piece of creating this culture is a written code of conduct. Lucky for us, Drupal.org has a code of conduct for us to use as a starting point. I included that in a resource slide at the end of the presentation. If you haven't reviewed it recently, you should definitely go check it out, both either as a community organizer or builder, but also as a community member. It's really important to keep an eye on that. And it's not important or not enough to state what type of behavior is expected within your community. You also have to protect your culture by enforcing code of conduct violations. Violations should be responded to quickly and clearly. How to moderate problems within a community is definitely enough material for completely separate talk in and of itself. There's a lot to cover. One quick tip that I can give right now is to address the problematic behavior instead of calling a person problematic. Extending grace whenever possible, and use your code of conduct to back up big, decisive decisions like complete expulsion from a community. It's not super common, especially, I guess, in my experience. I've been working with communities in WordPress and Drupal for the last 6+ years, and I've only had one experience where we actually had to remove someone within the community. We were able to point to our code of conduct and say, this is why you are not a good fit for our culture anymore. We would love to talk to you sometime in the future, but now it is not a good time. But one person out of 6 years and thousands of people is probably a pretty good rate. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. Some of you may recognize this as a quote from The Legend of Zelda, but it really applies to moderating a community as well. Moderating a community, excuse me, is a team sport. Bring a buddy, recruit a co-organizer for your meetup. If you're running a product community and can't hire a teammate, because sometimes that happens, ask for community volunteers. A community with a single organizer cannot scale and is a recipe for burnout. We have enough going on in our lives that we don't need to put our own personal mental health at risk. It seems a little meta, but there are many communities for community builders where you can connect with other folks who are either working through some of the same issues that you've come up against or currently working through them, so you can have someone to bounce ideas off of. This quote is something that helps guide our Pantheon community team as we make decisions. It says, community is about doing something together that makes belonging matter. And this is really the filter we use when we're trying to evaluate a new program, a project, or initiative or event. Does this thing that we are planning on doing make belonging to our community meaningful to those who participate? If not, back to the drawing board. The second question you need to ask is, who is your audience? You cannot reach people unless you know where they are, both mentally or physically, or whatever the virtual version of physically is. What problems do they have? What makes them tick? What motivates them? What kind of language do they use to describe the things that they're working on? Hey, listen. Your community will never be able to provide maximum value for its members if you don't know what's important to them. Listen to chatter on social media, join Slack groups, survey your members once you've gotten your community up and running. Spend more time listening to your audience than you do talking, and listen to their pain points, their goals, what they need to get out of the group. It can be hard to get used to listening more than speaking if you like to talk like I do. I've had to get a little bit more familiar and comfortable with uncomfortable silences. Some typical reasons that people join communities, and this is not an all-encompassing list, but they want to learn, they want to develop a sense of belonging, they want a place to be with people who are like them, and they want exposure to new ideas and people. That's not an all-encompassing list, but that's some of them. and show up where that conversation is happening. Forums, Slack, meetups. You might get to the point where you are ready to start your own platform, uh, with the caveat that it's always better to own your own platform or at least own your own data. There are so many platforms out there for creating community spaces. It's not a one slide or one size fits all situation. So definitely spend some time researching and defining what your needs are because every different product out there has its pros and cons. Some examples of community platforms are Mighty Networks, Tribe, Discourse, Vanilla Forums, Discord, obvious one that many of us are familiar with, is Slack, Influitive, and Choros communities. A successful community should feel like it belongs to the members. Community building is not a place for ego or an inflated ego. The community that you start needs to feel like it belongs to your users and not to you. You'll benefit from it, obviously, but your members and their needs have to come first if you want it to be a success. The more you know about your audience, the easier it will be to provide value to them. All right, third question. What do you do now? You have goals and guidelines in place for your organizers, and you know what your membership base likes to talk about and where they like to hang out. But now what? Solve their problems. Seems simple. I've heard it many times, heard it said many times that successful businesses solve their customers' problems, and communities of professionals are the same way. Instead of creating a product or selling a service, a community solves problems through content. This is where you put all that research about what topics your community finds important into play. Invite your audience to join you in creating and sharing relevant content that might be helping promote documentation for some topics that are keep showing up in Google search for your product. That might mean hosting webinars or workshops on new technologies. Collaborate with folks and don't control. Remember that your community story is being shaped by everyone involved, not just the organizers. Make it useful, make it relevant, and make it interesting. Change and flexibility are absolutely essential to remaining responsive to your community. Just because you made a decision doesn't mean that you won't have to revisit that decision in the future. So continue listening, even as you walk through excuse me, a more mature community. A general rule of thumb that I like to use is listen 90% of the time and talk only 10%. So the next thing you'll need to think about is engaging consistently. The difference between a community and a publishing platform is engagement. I'll say that again because I think it's one that especially communities that fall under a marketing organization sometimes forget is that the difference between a community and a publishing platform is engagement. We want conversations back and forth. And then these don't have to be big, huge, newsworthy topics. Small things like birthdays or community anniversaries are also super relevant. One of my favorite ways to engage with folks in our community is our weekly forum post early on in the week to talk about what we're working on that week, what we're excited about, what's motivating us or demotivating us, what we're reading or learning. It's just a really good way to meet people where they are. Consistent engagement builds loyalty, trust, and connection. And as a community, those are invaluable. I'm going to caution you against using a community that you are building for sales purposes. People, especially developers, can be suspicious of marketing tactics, and the effort that you put into building trust can easily be broken. So be open and transparent about what your community's plans are and your goals are, and act with integrity. Last thing I wanted to touch on is measuring and iterating. As I mentioned earlier, just because you made decisions and you started going in a direction doesn't mean that that's the way your community needs to be run forever. Collecting data surrounding our work and making decisions based on that information is important in basically every industry. Community building and tech is not an exception. As a reminder, again, building a community is not the same as growing a marketing audience or collecting sales leads, so you don't use the same kinds of metrics to track growth and trajectory. This slide is another full-length conference talk by itself, but at a high level, these are some of the things that you might want to track as a community builder or community manager and measure over time. In my resources at the end of this presentation, I have linked a good article that has some more detailed explanations and some formulas to actually calculate these metrics. The first one is retention, the percentage of community members who return within a certain amount of time. High retention means your content or community activities are resonating with your members and makes them want to come back. Low retention rate means you might need to revisit your goals and do some research into what your community members find valuable. Daily, weekly, or monthly active users, often abbreviated DAU, WAU, and MAU, your active user number should be trending in an upward direction over time, indicating growth. If these numbers start dropping or trending downward, you can use that information to work on recruiting or promotion of the community, or depending on what your goals are, get some realignment there. Time spent on the page. How long are your members spending engaging with your content, and does that reflect the amount of effort that you put into creating it? You spend a lot of time researching and publishing some video documentation, and then you discover that people leave in a disproportionately short amount of time. It's probably time to realign your goals with what your community actually needs. User-generated content. Don't you just love how clear some of these definitions are? User-generated content is content created by your users. Forum posts, replies, Slack posts, threads, emoji reactions. Love me some Party Parrot. Are your users invested in your conversations? All of that user-generated content is going to indicate where they're putting their excitement and effort into your community. As a review, the 3 questions you need to answer to set your community up for growth are: who are you? Who is your audience? And what do you do now? I have a resource slide for you that I will post in the chat as soon as I am done talking, because I am no good at multitasking. And I will be around for Q&A. Once again, my name is Katie Richards. I'm a community coordinator at Pantheon. I am Katie J. Richards on Drupal.org, KJ Richards on Twitter, and I don't always spend my time on the computer. Thank you so much for coming. Back. I have a face again. Thank y'all. I'm really excited for this. I just need to figure out where I stashed my my resource slide. Here is that resource slide for y'all, or that resource tab, I guess. It's a collection of tabs for you to get started on diving into some of the topics that I mentioned. Question from the Q&A: how have you seen communities change or adapt to restraints in COVID? Whew, man, it's been a weird year and a half as a community builder. I think we had, talking from a perspective of somebody who's mostly built communities online, it has, we had a little bit of an advantage starting out because we already had the groundwork in place. We've definitely ramped up not just our events and communications surrounding what our plans are, but also giving more options for social events and ways to connect with other people as people and not just as customers of Pantheon. And I've seen a member of multiple local meetups to me, and that's one of the things that they've done as well has been, yes, we're still going to talk about software development and issues surrounding Drupal and about WordPress, but we are also going to talk about how you're doing. I think the pandemic has definitely reminded us that people are people first, and there's a lot going on. And so we need to be flexible with our expectations for our community members and for ourselves as well. We're getting a little bit fiercely protective. The mama bear in me comes out when my coworkers start saying, "Well, I'm getting really exhausted and run down." Take some time off. Don't allow yourself to get run over. Otherwise, I'm going to step in and not let people run over you. All right. Also see another question from John that says the difference between community and publishing platform is engagement. And any advice for convincing stakeholders of the importance in investing in this? Uh, we joke internally that we are advocates both for our community in the community, but also for our community internally. We need to spend almost as much time convincing coworkers that we have valuable resources to use as much as we have spend time convincing our community members that we have valuable resources to use. Those resources are just slightly different depending on the situation. Um, One of the things that I found incredibly valuable, again, listening more than speaking, is showing up internally. Whether that means showing up in meetings or say people are starting a new initiative internally and you hear that it kind of tickles your brain in a way that makes you think that perhaps they could get some value out of speaking to customers or community members. It's easy to say, "Hey, can you add me to that meeting invitation? I don't know if I'll be able to make it, but I would really love to hear about the future of this project." Showing up in those meetings and saying, "Hey, by the way, you need to talk about, or you need to learn a little bit more about what new technologies people are using. You want to do some research on headless? I've got a bunch of people within our community that specialize in headless technologies and are really excited about the future of development. Can I connect you?" And often, the more you do that, the more excited that folks internally get about engaging with the community. It's taken multiple years, 2 years of advocating internally at Pantheon, but we've definitely seen a huge shift over those 2 years of people getting involved in our community directly versus just sending email blasts out to the entire Pantheon subscription base. You're very welcome for the resources. Excited that I was able to give this to you. If that's all the questions, I think I am past time, so I am going to end. Thanks so much. Yes, I will be around. If you have any questions, also you can drop a question in the Pantheon booth as well in the chat there, and I'll be answering those throughout the day. Bye, folks.